Hey, everybody. Welcome to our conversation today. Really quickly, the format of this discussion will be the four of us will be having a conversation around the diverse ways that we are now approaching wellness at work and at home, and also discuss how we go from vulnerability to resilience. This is going to be as interactive as possible, so I encourage you to submit questions and also feedback. Just give us commentary using the chat button below. Really quickly, M13 is a full-service venture engine. We invest in consumer behavior shifts. My partners and I have actual founder and operator experience, so we joined M13 to use our past successes and setbacks to help our founding team see around corners. This is hands-on work that we've been doing well before COVID. So as you might guess, we were designed to endure and help companies during both good and bad times. This kind of work requires empathy and a belief in sustainable growth. And that outlook is shared by my panelists today. I'm so excited for the three of you to be with us. Sascha Lewis is an entrepreneur who has been building businesses in the intersection of personal growth, progressive culture, and digital media. I met Sascha when he started Flavor Pill more than 10 years ago. His latest endeavor, EVRYMAN, is a men's emotional wellness company for men to build deeper connections to each other and to accelerate their personal growth. Coming from Berlin, Darja Gutnick started Bunch. It's a startup that focuses on empowering leaders to manage and improve company culture. Bunch is betaing an AI-enabled leadership coaching app right now. Darja is a big believer in face-to-face human connection and communication. She's a psychologist by training and specializes in team building, culture, and organizational psychology. Katz is the co-founder and co-CEO of Seed Health, a microbial sciences company pioneering applications of bacteria to impact human and environmental health. Our approach to science communication leans on an incredible alchemy of facts, storytelling, design, technology, and also the belief that we can make choices that help our bodies, our health, and our world. As far as me, I'm a partner at M13. I'm the head of brand communications. I'm also not an expert in wellness. In fact, during this pandemic, I've been in such awe of educators, right? They're particularly my friends at KIPP Newark, New Jersey. They are educators who have not only had to become experts in remote teaching and learning, but also helping their families deal with food insecurity, unemployment, eviction, and financial assistance. Meanwhile, I myself, I have to say, I've been struggling to be a good colleague, a daughter, a sister, a friend. In the last 21 days, I've lost 5 friends and parents of friends. I've lost someone I loved deeply to COVID. The last time I cried was 4 days ago. I'm actually curious to know when the last time each of you have broken down and cried. And I would love our audience to share with us as well. Again, give us feedback, ask us questions using the chat button. At the same time, we're all leaders, right? Like, we're accountable to each other, to our stakeholders, and to our teammates. We're supposed to keep our shit together, and we're supposed to keep our teams together. So my first question to each of you is, physically and physiologically, we're experiencing social connection as positive and rejection and loneliness as negative. Health and wellness have taken on new urgency and meaning. Will each of you please take a minute or two just to share how your work, your business addresses the health and wellness issues that we are enduring today? And what do you see as the opportunity that your work delivers on? Sascha, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Darja and then to Ara.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. It's really a pleasure to be here. And should I share when the last time I cried? I feel like you prompted that. Is that part of the
Please do.
The indoctrination here? I cried last Wednesday during my couples therapy session with my wife. So we can go deeper into that, but probably we'll hold that for the second conversation with all of us. So as far as where EVRYMAN sort of sits in this new paradigm that we are now, if you take a quick step back, 3 years ago, before Me Too and toxic masculinity, and then the evolution of sort of the woke culture, the idea of being a man was really based primarily around your physical and intellectual attributes, right? How you achieve those, sort of predicated how you were perceived, in terms of your society stature. And I think now what we're seeing is that there's a real need and urgency for men to learn how to communicate and to have an emotional like EQ, right? So how do we do that? Like men are I think adaptable, like all humans, but we need those tools, and that's not something that's been modeled to us, not something that's part of the everyday sort of normal conversations that we have in our workplace or even in our family lives. So I think now more than ever, and I think even with this pandemic and the situation we're dealing with, the idea that men are given the opportunity, given those tools to slow down and to open up and to connect to their emotions, to their feelings, having more of a somatic experience, not just an intellectual experience, is crucial. And that's sort of our mission, is how do we help men learn these tools and then be able to bring that out into the workplace, bring that out into their relationships with their families and their communities, and really embody their full spectrum potential that, for quite an extended period of time, that's just not something that's been normalized or in any way seen as a positive attribute as a man. So I think, the shift in the paradigm and in the way in which this conversation is going around what excites us to look at what a full spectrum man is part of what, that's our mission, is to help men have those tools and to build that new narrative.
Thank you. Darja?
Yeah, kind of following on what Sascha said, we are not specialized in delivering services to men. However, 75% of our current user base is male, so there is definitely a correlation still. And we're actively trying to change that. I know many are, between being a manager and being responsible for humans, capital, and other things, and being a man still is too highly correlated. So we also deal with a kind of like largely male user group. And I think what we deliver is in a very similar mission, almost in the same mission, I think, as Sascha's company. So we're building an AI-enabled leadership coach. What that means is basically we're combining bite-sized snippets, which we call leadership tips, which are basically 2-minute audio and digital experiences in a mobile app, so currently on iOS, which helps a manager to understand how to work for difficult situations. So typical examples are currently actually mental health and emotional well-being in a team. Many people are touched by the current crisis in many teams. So being a manager doesn't only mean anymore to show up to work and kind of deal with the business as usual, but it also means to carry the team, to instill hope, to deal with people's tears and people's sadness. So we get many requests from our users on how to actually help a team, for instance, express their emotions and how to create safe spaces in order to be able to bond differently. Yeah, and to not skip the first question, the last time I cried was actually, I think, 10 days ago, and it's personally a challenge I have. It's not really easy for me to kind of like tap into that part of myself, because the day-to-day of startups and entrepreneurship is very crazy, and currently probably even more crazy than usual. So I tend to go on autopilot and then I just function. But if I do that for a long time, the moment I slow down, and it was actually in a live coaching session, which I did with a founder coach on Instagram a few weeks ago, experiment. He actually brought me to tears by just simply asking me how I feel about the current situation. And I started understanding that it touches me on a very human level, much more than just on a tech or product or startup level.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Aura?
Sure. So, it's in our world of, and particularly like in biology, we kind of think in these like powers of 10. So we think a little bit about like 10 to the first, maybe being like our insular ecosystem. And I'm looking at the question of like, how does our work address what we're enduring today? I think, and I know in the introduction to this panel, I think you said, there's a quote about kind of putting on your own oxygen mask first. And I think, we were quite early in working from home and in advocating around COVID. And so we felt we were very lonely in our care of our internal ecosystem at the beginning of this, but what it did was allow us to kind of very quickly adapt and then be able to think about not just how we care about our team and make sure that we were immediately sustaining kind of both the logistical, mental, kind of physiological challenges that come with like immediately being apart, but also having like the great weight of like our, let's say 10 to the third, which is our community, whether it's our social media community, whether it's our subscribers, our members. And because we show up in people's lives every day and go into their bodies, literally with bacteria, we realize that, you know, it is not the kind of thing that I think our mission has kind of crystallized in all of this. And I think the way that we kind of address health and wellness today is very much, obviously we are a health company. And of course our products, while we have not joined the peddling of immune boosting narratives, like many of our other companies in our category, we do work at the center of what it means to, at least in our world, use bacteria to impact human health. And so I think in a lot of ways, like it has reinforced what we do every day, just from like a product research perspective, both around like our consumer work and innovations, but very much also in our life science and therapeutics and drug development, just because we do work around these huge unmet medical needs that impact many people collectively. But I think it isn't until like moments like COVID where you realize that like it really illuminates what it means for our collective health to go somewhere. It kind of brings stats to life in very visceral ways. You know, a lot of times you see like, 50% of women in the world have urinary tract infections. Like, you know, those things kind of live on a deck somewhere. But I think when you see the human side of what it means when like very large scale conditions kind of can permeate it, it obviously brings at least our mission to life in very different ways. And then of course we work in the invisible world of microbes. And so it's not a great time to be a microbe company because a virus is a microbe, technically. And you know, we, as a result of that, I think the other part of our work, which we are very, very proud of, is not just our science, but our deep commitment to the communication of science. And I think as this infodemic, permeated like everything from policy to headlines to kind of what we share on social media, we triple down on one of the things we really believe in, which is education and translation. And so we were very early in kind of translating a lot of the COVID work on social media. And then tomorrow morning, as an example of that work, we're launching a big initiative on Earth Day, which is a science course that people can take, because I think we have really realized what it means when we don't prioritize health and science. I think we're seeing the results of that. So those are some of the ways that we kind of think about, or the levels and powers at which we kind of think about how the work we do can make an impact.
That's a nice transition to the next question, which I want Sascha to kick us off with, and that's around how our workplace is now getting redefined, and we are expanding, obviously, our work into our home. So as a leader and as a family person, how are we supposed to make space to build resilience, both in the workplace and at home? How do we make room for self-care, as well as a diversity of ideas and perspectives, obviously even bacteria, which is good when we are in many ways more isolated than ever before? Sascha.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge for us as individuals and as a collective, because we're dealing with uncharted waters here, right? As an everyday experience, especially if you have children in the homeschooling situation. That is just an additional pressure. And I think, from our perspective, doing the work, as we sort of call it, like joining a men's group and having that supportive fabric and network and community outside of your workplace, I think is really crucial, because work can become all encompassing now, especially if you're an entrepreneur or a business leader, because there's additional pressure for most of us in terms of how we are going to even come close to hitting any projections or numbers, or just keeping the business afloat. And I think that idea of if you have a yoga practice or a meditation practice, or you're a part of a community group, whatever that outlet is that you consider self practice and taking care of oneself in that way, you have to prioritize it. Even if you have to shorten it or do it at an inopportune moment, that's not your regular morning ritual. But yeah, I think treating your self-care as if you would treat the most important meeting you had of the week with this, the CEO you've always wanted to talk to for the big partnership or whatever it might be. We have to prioritize ourselves, because if we can't take care of ourselves, we obviously can't take care of others. And that goes for our companies and for our families. So it's a challenging time in that way, I think, because we are being pressed, and the discipline that's taken is I think it's even more severe than what would be for just a normal entrepreneur and business owner, which is significant. And so I think, digging deeper in that way, and then also asking for support and asking for help, right? Like, so in our community, for example, we have hundreds of men now that are coming into our weekly calls that we do that are free for anybody, just to kind of check in and have other men sort of reflect back what they're struggling with, whether it be, financial struggles, personal struggles, emotional struggles. And so, using your community and being willing to be vulnerable in that way, like, hey, I don't have all this figured out. Like, I'm struggling. There's some challenges here that I'm not sure what to do with, and recognizing that you're not a lone wolf, right? Like, you don't have to do this all yourself, and that people will support you, and that you're not alone. Others are struggling that way as well. Like, we see that a lot in our community where, men feel like they're the only ones that have the problems because they don't talk about it with anybody. So they don't realize that their buddy or the guy who's, running a business like theirs is dealing with the same struggles. And so when you open up and you start to talk about how you're actually feeling, and you get honest and vulnerable, you start to realize, oh, I'm not alone. Like, okay, maybe we can support each other. And, I'm not doomed in that sense. And I think that's crucial, particularly with the way in which we're isolating and the way in which we're not connecting with people. You have to reach out. You have to be willing to, take a chance in that sense, and talk about what you're feeling, and open up and recognize that there are other people that support you along the way. And they're probably struggling with the same or similar issues, and you're helping them by being honest and being vulnerable.
Darja.
I actually wanted to bring in a perspective that I gained in a conversation with another M13 partner, Carl, who's on our board, and who's kind of was the original link between the M13 world and the Bunch world. And when so I was traveling when the news came in from WHO. I was actually in Austria. It was my husband's birthday, and we had this trip with like Argentine friends coming over, and we were literally like in the midst of mountains somewhere or whatever. And then the news came in, and of course the phone started ringing, and my co-founders called and said, yeah, we're all home already. We've been like precautionist, but like, so just so you know, this is what we're doing. The team started pulling together what happens if you work from home from one day to another, guide, sending them out to all our users. And there's been like this whole big turmoil. And I came home, I think 3 days later, on the last machine from like Vienna to Berlin, officially last machine, and quite scared, of course, because I think nobody knew at this point in time what that really means. And the next thing I did was, I think the day after, we had a call with Carl and Matt from M13, the board, and we were basically saying like, this is what we're going to do. This is what's going on. What is your take? And I think I will never forget how like this whole, when we started the call, we were, amongst the three co-founders trying to like sort ourselves and say like, okay, we need to like talk about these points and these points and these points. But everyone was super nervous and scared, because none of us has been in a crisis before with this business, or with any other business for that matter. And I can remember crises, but like I definitely didn't, it wasn't in that situation. I didn't carry the responsibility. And I think Carl made a very good point about like the most important thing in speaking about the oxygen mask is to take 3 steps back, breathe, and actually realize this is just yet another problem to solve. So looks very scary and very big. And, but in the end, it will depend on how good you can actually handle that situation, how much you will be able to not be led by fear, because your team and your business and your users need you to see the opportunities. They need you to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so on. And in that moment, it was really powerful, because it really kicked me out of that like fear response, which I immediately plummeted in, but like being super scared of like airports and trains and whatever not. And since then, I think it's been a really, really good guidance to always look for opportunities. And I wanted to bring up a few moments that I think in the conversations with leaders that are users of the Bunch coach, but also that we have in our Teams at Work community, have been kind of recognized, you know, when you have these conversations around this is hard and this is challenging and this is how we deal with it, and here we don't have answers. There is always these like 2-3 people that bring up that like alternative perspective to, wait a minute, but it really pushed me to rethink my whole weekly structure. It really pushed me to start and take time off on the weekend because I've never done that before. And I now have to, because if I don't, I simply don't rest or sleep at all anymore because my day rolls one into another. And I think it pushes us, this situation is a great catalyzer. It pushes us to deal with our shit. Like, it's literally pointing out all the malefficiencies in every process we have created that we could kind of like cover over. And it pushes us to be just extremely honest with ourselves, but also with our teams, to say, this doesn't work. I don't know the solutions. We need to talk about this because it clearly doesn't work. And literally iterate on ourselves and our teams on a weekly basis and do that from a very open and honest perspective. And I think that's extremely new, because we had a lot of rituals around offices and around dynamics, and now we don't know them anymore. So we are kind of like, it also has a lot of opportunity, this phase, because it grounds you to like being a human, showing up, sitting in the Zoom room and trying to like make decisions together and kind of going back to ground zero. So I think there is a lot of value in rethinking a lot of things that we kind of didn't dare to rethink because there is this unruled land that we are currently still in, which will end. Again, we will find a new normal, and then there's going to be different dynamics. But if I were to urge us, is to see, what did you always want to change and struggle to that you can now be open about and really tackle that problem with help around you, with the communities that you're part of.
Yeah, I like the reframing of the challenge as an opportunity. And Ara, I know that you've been helping to redefine what health means, so keep the conversation going, but tell us a little bit more about that struggle and that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I was also going to just say one thing quickly off of kind of what Sascha said and a little bit of Darja, which is that I wish we could rebrand physical distancing into self-proximity, because I think, you know, as much as we can sit in like the suffering of not being with others, I think we've like, I do believe this has been confronting in many ways, because we are very much not with ourselves in this way, which I think is a extraordinary opportunity that allows you to, I think, examine a lot of the choices you've make, both in how you structure your time, your relationships, your geography, your space, your the way that you care for yourself. Because if you can step aside, you know, give some distance and look at how you respond to this, I think to your point about the redefinition of health, I think one of the things, and I know in the question there's this notion of resilience, which actually in the natural world and in environmental science is actually often referred to as allostasis. And then in meaning the state of kind of like that sense of balance. And then, you know, when there's some sort of perturbation, or there's a problem, there's a fire, there's whatever the COVID is in the environment, which there are many, the measure really of an ecosystem's health is its return back to that state, or a state of balance. Not exactly and important to note, it's not defined as exactly restored back to that exact state. It is just back to a state of that balance in the body. We call it homeostasis. And I think like resilience is so, I mean, it is probably like the most important way to re-anchor into an understanding of health, because otherwise there's this kind of glossy Photoshop version of health that does two things. It anchors you into this notion that it's a state or a goal that you will one day reach. So if you look up wellness or health in the Webster's dictionary, you'll see that the WHO defines health as a state of emotional, physical, and mental well-being. And that was, I think, that last definition. I think the definition got touched, I think the last time in like 1948. And then in wellness, it says the state of, general well-being. And I think this idea that these things are states that we'll somehow achieve one day is a real betrayal to really what ultimately we want to do, which is to look at health as this verb, as this thing that we do every day, that is a strengthening of our muscles of resilience. So that the notion, I think there's that, beautiful quote that, is just that the idea that, change is not optional, it's suffering that is, right? And so I think the idea that these things are not going to continue to happen, I think us in the first world, Western world, we don't live with this kind of humility challenges on a daily basis. But in many parts of the world, COVID, is like the disruption that this has caused to our lives is not unknown to many people, because there are a lot of people that suffer from all kinds of things that disrupt and terrorize their lives in a daily basis. We just don't happen to experience them that often. We certainly don't live in a state of that. But I think if you look to the natural world, and you certainly look to kind of even how we understand in my world, the invisible world, I always laugh, like Obama initiated the Human Microbiome Project with the NIH, spent like $173 million to find out that the only marker of a healthy microbiome, because there really is not one healthy microbiome, is diversity. And so, and really it is ultimately that, that idea that, it's a rich environment and ecosystem that you want to return to. And resilience, of course, is how quickly you can return to that state, in the face of change, and how you choose to do that, I think, is really part of our collective learning and education and wisdom that I do hope comes from this.
Mm-hmm. I remember something you said in an interview. You said that we are cleaning ourselves to death, and I thought that was such a powerful, powerful
Yes.
line.
Yeah.
And also, I think that there's something incredibly fascinating about space. With my, I have a background in commercial space exploration and building companies in that area. But I heard you mention something around the overview effect, which I'm a big believer in the overview effect. But you turned it inwards and described the inner view.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us, can you unpack that really quickly?
Absolutely, sure. And just one very quick thing on space, actually, we know that the built environment actually impacts your microbiome. So contrary to people believing that the New York subway is the dirtiest place they could possibly lick the pole, it's actually not. And in a lot of ways, the environments that we've created are actually a part of what has diminished and caused what we refer to as the climate change of our insides, which is this kind of despeciation of the organisms that live in and on our bodies. And so I only say that to say, and there's a lot of new disciplines like neuroaesthetics and others that really are starting to understand that actually, like, the design of space, the proximity to how you bring the natural world into space or not, actually directly impacts health. And there's, of course, lots of research on like lighting, temperature of bulbs, and whether or not you have corners in hospital rooms impacts healing. And so there's a lot of that, but from the microbial world, there's a lot of interesting ways the future of built space will be impacted by what we understand in science and the impact on our microbes. But and I lost my train of thought. You asked me about
the interview.
Oh, the interview. Yes, of course. So the overview effect, just for everybody who's listening, if you don't know what the overview effect is, I think it was first defined, I believe, in 1973, which is it is the feeling that an astronaut has the very first time they go to space and look back and see this kind of blue, what they refer to as the blue marble, or what Carl Sagan referred to.
I think, Ara, can you hear us? Okay. While we bring her back, we can continue the conversation. Very quickly, we saw that there is a question from the audience. And while we wait for Ara, maybe Darja and Sascha, you can answer this. Olga has asked, are there unconventional ways you are staying connected with your customers and or keeping your business afloat? It's actually a good one. Darja, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, it's actually a super good question, I think. Cool.
It's okay. We'll wait for you to get settled. We'll have Darja answer a question from the audience. No worries.
So this is not a COVID-19 effect. We've actually been started to do this before. In our product development efforts, we opened up, we kind of switched platforms away from the usual emails and things like this to messengers. So we've been interacting with like early testers of the app through iMessage and WhatsApp. And it has proven extremely valuable for us and the users because we got a different perspective from our users. Like it really is like a qualitative change. It doesn't feel like it lives on the border between like a personal and a business relationship because you're living in their messenger, so to say. So you get a very different perspective of each person. And it feels also that we actually have more personal relationships with the people that use our product. What that enables is that now where everyone is super bombarded with content and getting through emails is very, very hard, that kind of saved, I think, a lot of our relationships so that we don't actually feel a huge difference. We also feel a bit of like kind of like mood swings, I think. So some weeks people are more interactive because there is more challenges that are happening and there is more questions and more things to be discussed and more input and tips necessary. But in other weeks, it's quieter. And I think a lot of content driven companies experience this. And the other part I wanted to say is that I think everyone is actually experimenting with what works for us as communities right now. So we kind of are also in this area shaken by the change, which is, I think, again, like there is a lot of positive effects to that. For instance, we are currently experimenting with the way we are providing value through our newsletter. So because we are kind of tips and content driven recommender in the end, in terms of product, we basically curate and summarize different leadership advice from different thought leaders, famous leaders, but also just practitioners, and recommend that in a highly personalized way. So right now we are basically constantly pushing ourselves to reduce the space we're using in the inboxes of our users so that we can actually provide value in like a one-liner and then build up kind of more thoughtful content experiences so that people can actually decide multiple times whether they want to really give us another 30 seconds of their time and another 30 seconds of their time. So I think being mindful of your community's time is extremely important. And I think that's actually a great way to push yourselves and your teams to find better way of communicating asynchronically with your communities.
Sascha, tell us about what you're doing since EVRYMAN is so focused on retreats. What have you been doing to stay connected with your group?
Yeah, it's been quite challenging. So we had to cancel, I think when it's all said and done, we'll probably cancel about 25 total retreats. And those retreats are anywhere from 30 to 75 men. So it's really the main product that we have and the main way we connect to our community. And so it's forced us to obviously become more of a digital first community. And that's actually been the vision all along. It's just been a harder product for us to develop. We've always thought of ourselves as sort of a URL meets IRL business. So it's actually, we've actually been calling it Project Lemonade. This idea that this is a bunch of lemons that we've been handed because our revenue went from, close to $1 million for the year to zero very quickly. And how do you pivot? How do you create an opportunity for growth and for change? And so we've done a couple of things at a base level where we're now doing global community calls on a weekly basis where we get usually somewhere between 100 and 200 men from all over the world that come and just have a sort of a taste of what the EVRYMAN method is. And that's new for us, and that usually it was you had to come to a retreat or you have to join one of our 120 plus groups that meet all over the world. And you kind of had to really lean in and put a lot of energy and effort to get some of our work and to experience it. Now all you got to do is click on a Zoom link and listen and participate for an hour. So we've lowered the barrier of entry, which has actually been really exciting for us because to be able to see men from all walks of life come together, I think particularly now as all of us are wanting more human connection, and there is a global sort of energy around what we're all struggling through, to be able to sort of see men from different places and to hear the struggles that they're having and the hopes and challenges that they're dealing with. I think it's grounding for our community. And then we're moving very quickly into a membership model. We just got our first cohort of about 40 men onto our membership product. And we'll launch sort of the more public facing of that, the version of that throughout the course of May. And that's very exciting, you know, just in terms of the dynamic ways in which we can communicate with our community, the ways in which we can scale our online groups from, you know, hundreds of groups that have in a physical sense meet on a daily or a weekly basis now to hopefully tens of thousands that meet online. So it's actually been, you know, somewhat of a positive course shift for us as a business to have to sort of look at how do we build a more scalable online model, and how can we know what we do at a retreats, you know, are transformative. We get unbelievable responses from men and from their wives and from their partners saying, hey, this is what this man needed, and thank you so much. And, you know, we get all the praise that we could imagine. So how can we replicate that now in the digital space is the big challenge. And so taking these steps to make it much easier for men to be introduced to our work and to feel part of the community is a big adaptation for us in that sense. And so far it's worked out really, I think, positively. And, you know, we'll see. I mean, we're in one of those places where in the next 3 to 6 months, it's going to be pivotal for us. I don't think we'll be able to do physical real world events until 2021, probably spring or beyond. So it's a big pivot for us, and it's an exciting challenge. And so far the community has responded really positively.
We're going to go to one last question, but first I want to give Ara the opportunity to go back to exploration of space and how equally captivating our bodies are. Yeah, help us look at our bodies in a different way, Ara.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's, you know, look, it's not so much about the body as much as it's like, just for us, we're always, and not dissimilar to the way that, you know, Darja just like whether you call it a pivot or an adaptation, I think it's, for us, we're just like obsessed with how you shift perspective. I think that's where like really deep, like first principles thinking kind of comes from. And so, you know, the overview effect, as I was saying, is what, of course, astronauts experience when they first look back on Earth. And it's like this overwhelming, the way they describe it, it's beautiful to hear in interviews. It's like this like overwhelming sense of accountability for this home that we have. And I love that. And I think what we always say is, well, how could we then inspire the interview effect, which is like, you know, we have such a fascination with everything outside of us sometimes, like space. And so we always say, like, how could you inspire the interview effect, which is like, how could you show people this like incredible like space, like ecosystem that you actually walk around in all day, and then nurture at this idea or accountability of like our health and our collective health, and how could that inform everything from policy to what you choose on a menu and pick up at the grocery store every day. And so I think that's kind of where, and of course, because we work in the invisible world, and particularly one that people have been trying to kill for a very long time, thanks to everything from mouthwash to antimicrobial everything. I think we're always trying to figure out, you know, how do you just like shake up that perspective, and how could you kind of get as fascinated about space, about your body, as we are about kind of all of these like more mystical, magical things. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said, you know, we have more microbes between like your belly button and your pelvis than like than there are stars in the universe, in our known universe. You know, it's an interesting idea.
Wow.
Absolutely. Okay, one last question, and this is something that I struggle with ongoing. How is it possible to make room to integrate others' needs right now into our day-to-day? I'm thinking specifically about our community, knowing that so many people are suffering, and yet we are responsible for taking care of our inner circles, our families, and our teammates and our companies and our customers. Darja, do you want to kick us off on that one? And, you know, everyone, please chime in.
Yes, actually, super good thought to bring up, because it may seem, we're talking about self-care, so and the oxygen mask metaphor is a really good and interesting one, because sometimes it feels like it's easier to care for others, right? Or at least to be worried about others, not necessarily to care about them. And to get distracted and not to care about yourself. But it actually could be, or it is a very good instrument to care about your emotional health through caring and helping others. And specifically in these crisis situations, I think it's easy to think that you need to focus on your kind of core team, yourself, your family, and that is all true. Of course you do. But by actually picking up a very kind of like tangible project in your community, can be anything you wish, any purpose that you will wish, or any cause that you feel like joining, you actually reestablish this belief of that we call self-efficacy in psychology. So the belief that you can actually change things for the positive. Because what crisis situations do with your psyche is basically kind of induce the sense of self, helplessness. So you sit there and you kind of go, okay, I mean, now the world is shut down. Like, what am I going to do with my little life here? How can I really make a difference now? So I can also just kind of like passively sit and wait until things get better again. But that's exactly the reaction that actually drags you more into this like swirl of negativity, kind of passivity, and where it gets harder and harder for you as a leader and also as a person to just reignite that opportunistic human drive of like, no, we can make this better. This is going to go forward again. And I think in order to connect to that positive spirit, I think gratitude journaling has been like pointed out in the past, but now we have this brilliant opportunity. There's so many issues, like real issues around us. We, for instance, with our team, have helped a service here in Berlin that basically gives leftover food from supermarkets to homeless people and to people with low income. And they obviously ran out of all disinfectants and all masks and all of that. Like, they did not have any of this. They had to shut down all their stations. So we used the founder network and the startups network to fundraise like a few hundred euros literally for them, and then buy that again, and like made a huge difference. It cost us 4 hours probably at max, I don't know, including drive there. And it made a huge difference for the team that we actually could help someone else immediately, like beyond our direct effect. And I do think it actually helped us to kind of, in a more difficult week, to understand, no, we can make a difference. If we really just put our minds to it, we invest a limited amount of time box, we actually can help real people really fast. So I think to like instill that sense of hope and optimism, it's really, really important to find pockets of opportunity to help others.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think you all have shown us that the best businesses right now are those that are healing and resilience building and regenerative. On behalf of everyone at M13, I want to thank Sascha, Darja, and Ara for your time, and also everyone who joined in. We'll be emailing you a link to the full webinar and also a quick survey. Help us get better and give us feedback on what you want to see more of. We will post highlights from this conversation. We have a lot more to unpack, so go visit us on m13.co. And while you're there, please sign up for our community so that you get access to more gatherings as well as more content around navigating these times. Thanks again for all of your time, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.